Welcome to the English Hour on ANN Television. Our guest today is Father Nadim Nassar. Father Nadim is director of the Awareness Foundation, a group that works for rapprochement and for coexistence between different cultures. Father Nadim is Syrian, he's Latakian born, he's a Christian priest, and indeed he's the only Syrian priest in the Anglican Communion, the only Syrian Christian priest in the Church of England today, which makes him rather unique in more ways than one. Welcome to the English Hour on ANN Satellite Television. Today we have Father Nadim Nassar with us. Father Nadim is the founder of the Awareness Foundation. He is Latakia born. He is the only Syrian priest in the Anglican Communion, in the English, certainly in the Church of England. There is none other. And we're honored to have him with us. He has a particular conscience for Syria, of course, being a Syrian, but his day-to-day work is on the Awareness Foundation, which deals with interfaith dialogue, deals with dialogue between cultures, and that is an issue that we will return to. But first we'll talk a little about Syria and the precious, beautiful country that Syria is and the catastrophe that it has become. Father Nadim, can you just tell us a little about how things are for Christians in Syria today?
Thank you very much for having me. Syria is bleeding, and it has been bleeding for the last 3 years. And not only the Christians are bleeding, every Syrian is bleeding. And one thing I want to highlight before I speak about the Christian plight is that the suffering of Christians is not in any way more important than the suffering of any Syrian, whatever background he or she has.
Absolutely.
Since I am a priest and I will shed some lights on the situation, which is dire, which is absolutely horrible. For the first time, who would think that Syria would have a time that Christians would be persecuted just for being Christian? That was unthinkable before. Now people are being beheaded for their faith. When they asked the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, about martyrdom, he said, don't go any longer to the history books to study martyrdom. Go to Syria, in the church. So the situation is difficult, and it's getting more and more complicated, and especially in the east of Syria. The whole world heard about the conditions that the Syrian Christians are living under. Either you pay levy in gold, or you convert to Islam, or you get killed. What kind of options do we have to survive in the birthplace of Christianity?
Yes, it is the birthplace, isn't it? It's Malula is the only place, or one of the very few places in the world that some people still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ. And that was a terrible, terrible situation there, with this violence that extreme groups taking over Malula. It's back now. That particular city or town is liberated again, isn't it? It's free from.
I hope so, and I think so. And the painful truth about Malula and about Saydnaya and the situation of Christians in general, for me, the really painful truth is to discover the volume, the huge ignorance in the West about the existence, the situation, or anything about Christians in the Middle East. We are invisible to the West. This was for me a shock. I'm still asked, William, when did you become a Christian, Father? What do you mean, when did you become a Christian? I've been always Christian. Oh, well, then your parents became Christians. No, my family goes back probably to in Christianity to St. Paul.
Yes.
St. Paul, the road to Damascus. In the West, St. Paul and Damascus are fantasia. I always tell the church in the West, Damascus, the biblical Damascus, is like Camelot, and Paul is King Arthur, all in the biblical fantasia, but in the mind, in the psyche of the Western people, this biblical fantasia has very little to do with the Damascus, which is the capital of Syria today.
Absolutely. And about 8-10%, something of that order, of Syria's population is Christian.
Are we talking about before the conflict?
Before the conflict,
No.
yes.
Well, before the conflict, I think we were about 13-14%.
Really?
Yes.
And now that's reducing, obviously.
Yes.
Christians and, well, Muslims, Christians, everybody's fleeing, aren't they?
Yeah, of course.
The Christian population is everywhere, is in a diaspora. Would you say, I mean, I know the unique pressures on young Christian men, because they either have to face call-up into the army or run, and running means becoming refugees, and plus the pressure of the whole fear of the violence that is going on from both sides.
And if you flee, there is no work for you.
Yes.
Wherever you go, you are Syrian, refugee. There is a stigma now with the Syrians that no work. And if they give you work, they give you work with a very cheap labor. You're looked at as nothing.
There's also the tragedy. I mean, not just talking about Christian women, but women generally from Syria are under terrible pressures in these camps as refugees. I don't know, it's almost too distressing to talk about on television, but it is true that the pressures on young ladies are almost evil.
And especially very young girls. I mean, we're talking about 9 years old, and they are sold in the most horrific market, in the name of marriage, in the name of quick marriage, and of course kind of legal papers just made quickly and shipped or taken away to any country in the world. It's like a market. It's a legitimate legal human trafficking, and the world is watching.
And this is happening in all the countries neighbouring Syria.
Of course,
yes,
even inside Syria, in some areas.
How sad.
And even the in some areas, the civil courts have been suspended. Only the Sharia court is there, and they sentence the people immediately. So how can a girl, 9-year-old girl, raise her voice to say, no, I don't want to marry this man? They can't. There are no courts, there is no law and order, and this is what we should believe, that this is the Arab Spring.
And meanwhile, the international community stands by and watches. I mean, the vast sums, the billions of dollars that are pledged to relief work for refugees from Syria, for example, well, specifically for that issue, by the international community, do not get spent, as far as I can tell, and the international community weeps crocodile tears. It is, I am right in this, it is doing little or nothing compared to its immense pledges.
And we have as the Awareness Foundation, we have existence in the Middle East. We have a branch in the Middle East, and the director of the Middle East, my sister Huda, just came back from Syria, and the situation in the camps are miserable, absolutely miserable. And you think, where are the billions going into, which were supposed to be building up those people and improving their conditions. We have some projects there with the small budget we have, but we have no middleman, we say. We have our groups on the ground that we support, and we as a educational foundation, we are very much very passionate about building task forces, teamworks inside Syria and in the camps outside Syria to deal with children. Now, after 3 years of conflict and bloodshed, you have a whole generation of children missing education.
And children, of course, are the vulnerable in our society, the children and the elderly, for whom we have a particular responsibility.
And we're trying to train some people to lead task forces and groups to look after children where they are. But of course, what can you do with the
absolutely awful,
very little we have?
Yes. So, given this situation, given this tragedy, do you view the situation with hope? I mean, is there the beginnings of some sort of positive movement with this? I mean, the Geneva talks have been stalled and arguably are not effective because they don't include either the whole opposition or any of the opposition on the ground. Nonetheless, they are something. Do you see some sort of hope?
You know, Geneva II, regardless, and I always said that, and even before Geneva II started, I said whatever the outcome of Geneva II, and I was not hoping for, I mean, Geneva II will move mountains in Syria, but whatever the outcome, whatever the consequences of Geneva II, it is enough that Geneva II, for the first time in the modern history of Syria, people of different political persuasions, or they even consider themselves enemies, bitter enemies, could sit around a table and talk, regardless of what the outcome is. But it's a historical event. We have to admit that people should talk. When the German Chancellor came to Britain recently, and she spoke to the Parliament, she was proud of Europe. And one major reason she gave why she was proud of Europe, I wish she would say that to the whole world. She said, I'm proud of Europe because we learned from our history that problems could not be solved through violence. We learned in Europe to sit and talk and solve our problems through dialogue. For the last 2 years, I have been screaming for the Syrians to sit and talk. In every meeting I attended, you know also very well, I met the opposition. I met people from loyal to the regime. I met people who are against both. I met all kinds of people in the last 2 years. And very few people believed that dialogue could bring anything.
Yeah. This is the great weakness, isn't it, of the British and American governments in this whole picture, because unlike the Russians, unlike the French, who do, for all their sins, speak to everybody, to speak to all the factions, and have even the Spanish, or many of the minor governments in Europe speak to everybody concerned. And indeed the Spanish have been holding some meetings for some of the secular groups and doing some quite good work. The major powers, Britain and America, refuse to speak to everybody.
And also they refuse to listen to the reason. I was also involved with the Foreign Office. I attended several meetings in the Foreign Office, and every time I brought the subject of dialogue to the Foreign Office, there was a deaf ear. One senior minister said to me, Father Nadim, it is so difficult to bring the opposition to the table of dialogue. And that really upset me, William. because I looked at him and I said, what are you talking about? Don't insult my intelligence. Don't tell me the oppositions don't come to the table. I said, who pays sets the tone. You're supporting the oppositions, and don't tell me you cannot exercise any pressure on them to come to the table of dialogue. This is nonsense.
Yes.
The Americans and the British have done very little to initiate or to foster dialogue between the Syrians. And we are talking about First World, we are talking about democracies. This country paid blood and tears and sweat to emerge with the system we have, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and the Parliaments, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and all that did not come out of vacuum.
No.
So why don't we learn from our history and learn that only sitting around the table that we can solve our problems? God created us on His image. I'm a priest. I'm not a politician, William. I'm a priest. And I passionately believe that God gave us the mind that we can solve all our problems through the dialogue, through sitting and talking and finding a way out of any conflict we have, rather than killing each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, well said. But given the current situation and looking at these major powers, there is, of course, what we have this expression in England and in America, the elephant in the room.
Yes.
And the elephant in the room is the
Point it out.
yes,
Go ahead.
the huge issue that
What?
nobody likes to talk about, and it's Iran, of
Yes.
course, in the context of Syria. Iran has presumably to be brought on board if we're going to have a resolution of the Syrian conflict.
Iran is not a bigger elephant than any major power around Syria and internationally. Would Iran have more interests in Syria than Russia? Would it have more interests in Syria than the United Kingdom? One of the Foreign Office ministers said to me, Father, in politics there is no friendship. In politics there are interests. And fine, great. Let's talk then about interests. Iran does not have more interests in Syria than any major players in the world, like America, like the UK, Europe, even Lebanon, even Turkey. Why do we include Turkey, not Iran?
But because, why do we include, yes, we should include Iran, but Iran is certainly, if you like, to put it crudely, bankrolling Syria up to a point. So, I mean, she if not consulted, it's a problem, no? If we leave...
Of course it is. I mean, we shouldn't leave anybody out. We shouldn't leave anybody out. Why? Because everybody who has a stake in Syria, has interest in Syria, and bringing them into the table, we are acknowledging, or we are securing more and more the success of the dialogue. Once we cut off people, this I noticed, this is the way the Americans and the British think. If you are not our friend, we threaten you. We threaten you by excluding you from the peace conference, as if the peace conference is those who we consider friends, and those who are not friends but we agree that they would come. It's like if you are a good boy, I include you.
Yes.
This mentality which they used and the British used with the Palestinians and with Israel and
yes, it is very childish. Yes, of course immature. They send people to Coventry. Well, our expression anyway in the English language, send them to Coventry.
Yeah.
They refuse to talk to certain groups, certain people.
And also like the Camp David, the last Camp David, a couple of years ago. Why it failed? It failed because America wanted to select the people who should attend. Once you enter into this selective mode, you never reach or achieve what you want.
Absolutely.
If you really want to achieve peace, you bring the bitter enemies. You don't bring the friends.
Yes,
You bring the bitter enemies and you try to facilitate dialogue. This is the ABC of diplomacy. I'm a priest, I'm not a diplomat. But I know that when God wanted to talk to us, He came through Jesus Christ to talk to us, to facilitate a dialogue with us. This is the Christian faith. What is the Christian faith is about.
Yes, absolutely. And so you see this way forward as dialogue.
Absolutely.
And of course it's key in your own day-to-day work at the Awareness Foundation. You are dealing with, actually, just moving perhaps onto the broader picture for a moment. We'll come back to Syria very much, but because it's essential. But the work of the Awareness Foundation is on interfaith, intercultural dialogue is perhaps more to the point, isn't it?
And intercommunal, the community. We try to foster dialogue within the community, in wherever the community is. We try to encourage people to talk with each other. Because, first of all, although we are living in a global village, as we call it,
yes, yes.
Despite of the fact that globalization is coloring our life, William, we are still very ignorant about each other. And what we are trying to do, we're trying to encourage people to learn about those who are different. I say, dangerous statement, I know, but I say it, and I believe it. The biggest problem we have in the whole world is differences. We are unable still to deal with differences, to deal with somebody who thinks differently, who is different, and still we can find a way to live together, to flourish together, to build even a better life together, without killing each other.
But there are two stereotypes, aren't there? There is the concept of a multicultural society, that kind of thing that Tony Blair affirmed in our own culture here, and arguably some would say wrongly. And there's a concept of an integrated society, the kind of thing that the French affirm, where it is illegal, for example, for a woman to cover up in France, because they believe that society should be integrated and that everybody, you can practice your own faith,
yes,
but that everybody should have one culture. So that's very distinct from the current British model. Which do you affirm, or do you affirm neither? Am I throwing in what we call a red herring? Are we going the wrong way when we one or the other?
I do not believe in multiculturalism, in the way Tony Blair presented that. There is a difference between multiculturalism and melting pot. So America is a melting pot. Almost from the beginning of the establishment of America, yes, America was built on the concept of being a melting pot. Regardless of now we have a little bit of segregations and a little bit of communities living, the Hispanic and the black and white and all this. Yes, I acknowledge that. But still, in essence, America is a melting pot. Europe can never be a melting pot. Why? Because we have to acknowledge that there is something called English culture. And there is something called German culture, French culture. We can't ignore that. We can't pretend that there is no English culture and all the cultures are equal in England. This is destructive. It won't help in building communities. And the most difficult thing is to convince the English that they are English and should be proud of their culture.
Yes. But I mean, if you believe in a melting pot, you don't believe in a melting pot. I mean, if you believe, I love that Blue Mink song from the 60s, you know, that we're all going to turn out coffee-colored people and it's one world.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
Because what's wrong with having a culture? I mean, why do we want to...
So you are a multiculturalist. You do want your separate identities.
No, multiculturalism is bringing everybody in and pretend all are equal. But all are not equal. The English, they are the host culture. When I came to England, I was aware that I was coming to an English culture, a distinct culture. Don't look at London. London is not England. London is a special case.
Yes, okay.
But when you go to English towns and villages, they are English. They have culture. They have music. They have costumes. They have traditions. They have their own dialects. They have all that.
So you believe that everybody coming to England should assimilate English culture but retain their own religious beliefs?
No, not assimilate. Integrate. The assimilation goes with the melting pot. You go to America, you assimilate into the American way of life.
What's the difference? I can't...
Assimilation, it means I will never be an English gentleman. Never. But I can integrate in the sense of I do not believe that I'm a stranger here. I feel more at home in the sense of I understand the people understand me. For example, why shouldn't the immigrants learn English? I think this is very, very wrong if we allow the immigrants to live in this country without learning English. Because this is part of the integration, not assimilation, integration. I will always be Syrian. I will always have my identity as Syrian with my culture, with some of my thinking, the food I like, the music I like. Being integrated would not prevent me from liking Fairuz or Kulthum or Abd al-Halim.
Okay.
It will not prevent me from...
So what's the distinction with that, between that and multiculturalism then? Your stand is...
multiculturalism, if it is built on integration, yes. Because multiculturalism, the concept does not acknowledge enough the host culture, that there is a culture we have to respect.
I see. Well,
it's not all a soup.
Yes. Okay.
This multiculturalism, which pretends that the society is a soup, I don't believe in it.
So then, just shifting gear now, right back to Syria,
Yes.
taking this philosophy of multi-ethnicity, multiculture into Syria, you believe that Syria has a whole range of host cultures. Rather, you wouldn't say, for example, that Sunni Islam is the host culture of Syria, or would you? I mean, how do you...
There is another concept for Syria I would use.
Okay.
If we said America is assimilation, England or Europe, integration, Syria is coexistence. Because why? Because most of the immigrants here, most of the multiculturalism here, based on the immigrants to England. And those immigrants are from different cultures, but they are not English. They came from all kinds of backgrounds.
Okay.
And by second or third generation, they became more English and English. But if you go to Syria, all the minorities in Syria are Syrian. They are not immigrants. The Druze are not immigrants.
Sure.
The Alawiyin are not immigrants. The Christians are not immigrants. We form together with the Sunni the genuine social fabrics of the Syrian society. Here is different. America is different because you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of immigrants to integrate and play a role in the fabrics of the society. But in Syria, all the minorities are genuinely Syrians. So they have to learn to coexist.
And can you have coexistence without the breaking up of Syria into fragmented? I mean, you already have the Kurdish group, which is virtually autonomous in the north now. Are you going to have an Alawite state and another secular state around Damascus and another Islamic state down around Daraa or whatever? Are you going to can you actually, given the level of internecine violence, for want of a better phrase, within Syria, can a post-war Syria have the kind of coexistence that you argue for?
What you're saying is the failure of coexistence. If we fail to coexist, those little entities will emerge as states because we failed. If we're talking about coexistence, is bringing back Syria together as we were living, not only under the Assad regime or the Assad government. We have been living for centuries in Syria. The society was integrated, the Syrians. But the problem is, for centuries also, we had occupiers. Look at the Ottoman Empire. The Turks ruled Syria for more than half a millennium. They ruled, the Ottoman Empire ruled Syria for more than half a millennium. Right?
Yes.
More than 500 years.
Yes.
Then the Ottoman Empire collapsed. The British and the French and the Europeans came to save us from the Turks.
Yes.
I see your smile. And we ended up them occupying us.
Yes.
And we ended up with Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1916. In 1916, the French and the British in Knightsbridge, they divided the Middle East. And if you look at the map of the Middle East, William, a lot of borders you see straight lines. They didn't have even time to negotiate the borders. They have ruler and a pen. Boom. They cut the Middle East into areas, and we have the Middle East now divided. And that cloud brought that rain, this rain today. We are suffering still from the consequences of Sykes-Picot Agreement. 95% of the British have never heard of the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Yes, that's for sure. Yes. But, I mean, given this situation, can you really have... It's one thing to talk about coexistence, but can you have peace? There is a distinction between peace and coexistence. Yeah. Is there any prospect for this next generation to have peace again in Syria?
When we don't have peace, then also I would say coexistence fails.
Because you can have a truce without, between two warring parties, and that's
not coexistence.
That's not.
That is not coexistence. That is what I call tolerance. That is the lowest common denominator. That I tolerate your existence in the sense of I don't like you, I don't want you there. Sometimes I hate you, but what shall I do? You are there, I accept it. Is this what we want in Syria?
But you see, they have a difficulty, don't you? Because in a post-war environment, you have a natural, a very human desire to call for justice. Exactly. But justice, generally, when people use the word justice, they do not mean fair play. They mean retribution. They mean revenge. Yes. And this becomes a very dangerous situation. How would you see Syria? I mean, would you believe in some sort of truth and reconciliation committee approach like South Africa did after their very brutal apartheid years, or what? How would you see Syria climbing out of its present situation of brother hating brother? I mean,
I wrote an article in the Lebanese newspaper, As-Safir. My first article there was about this, William. I said justice would hurt. Justice alone hurts. If God is only just, we shouldn't exist. Because the wrath of God, the anger of God about the evil we do, He would have destroyed us. If that is justice, if only justice works. But if we learn from religion, if we turn religion into something constructive rather than destructive, and learn how God with the justice, he is love.
Mm.
In the Christian faith, God is love.
Mm.
And who abides in love abides in God and God in him.
Mm.
So love and justice together work. Justice alone, as you said, revenge, destruction, and bitterness, and you bring a lot of anger with justice. But Desmond Tutu, Bishop Tutu, in South Africa, he could bring out of his faith this commission of reconciliation and justice. Not only justice, there is a reconciliation. There is encounter of acknowledgement. Both acknowledge that we are in the wrong. We are all in the wrong. And I have done something awful. And I need to repent. And I need to ask your forgiveness. And you ask my forgiveness. And then we can mutually talk. And that's what was missing in Geneva too. What I expected, William, in Geneva too, is somebody to stand up and say to the Syrian people, I am sorry. We have done a lot of wrong things. We have blood on our hands. Forgive us. And after that we can talk. But both sides were arrogant. They were going there. You know, when I heard both speaking in the opening, I thought, hold on. Who told you it's about you?
I was actually very shocked because all the politicians, with actually oddly enough, with the possible exception with the leader of the Syrian National Coalition, but anyway, all the major politicians who were there, British, American, Syrian, their speeches were infantile. I mean, they were just berating the other in such a pathetic, and even the U.S. Secretary of State, so undignified. Everybody was so undignified that I'm sorry, Walid Muallim is a friend of mine, but all of them behaved with a lack of dignity.
Because they thought it's about them.
Yeah.
I mean, where is, if everybody asks themselves, William, where is the red line? Is it me? Is it my denomination? Is it my religion? The Christians are the red line? Or is it Syria, the red line? When we all say Syria is the red line, and from there we start, then I'm not important any longer. I'm important as much as I can contribute to the red line.
Yes, the problem is there's too much. Well, there's this word, isn't there, in the English language, hubris, which means false pride. Everybody is filled with pride and false pride. But ultimately, then we must be working for some sort of goal, and this goal, presumably, is a democratic Syria.
What does that mean?
Well,
because in the West, this is just a word used too much. We want democracy in Iraq. We want democracy here and there. And what is this word, democracy? I mean, I've been trying to wrestle with the word. The word is, this concept means nothing in itself, just democracy. It means something only when you take this concept and put it in a context. You talk about the English democracy. You talk about the French democracy. Are they the same? Far from it. You say the German democracy, the American democracy. Every model of democracy in the West is different. Why does the West want to impose an abstract term on the Middle East? And now every country in the Middle East has its own ethos.
But presumably the Syrian people would rather have, it may be a Syrian democracy, but would rather
Syrian
have...
democracy.
Yeah.
I want a Syrian democracy.
Okay.
I don't want democracy.
All right.
The difference is enormous. Democracy without Syrian democracy is what the West understands for me as a Syrian. No, thank you very much. I want to see how this concept emerge from this conflict, from the Syrian people, and how the Syrians understand this concept. Not how the West wants the Syrians to understand democracy. That doesn't work, William, because the West thinks that they understand everything for everybody. But it is a myth. It won't work.
But presumably there must be some form of reshaping of Syrian democracy,
absolutely.
because the existing system, doesn't work, and,
No.
and we're, in theory, the Syrian president's term is up on the 10th of May and he should face re-elections. But because I say 10th of May because that's 7 years since the 10th of May 2007, I think it was, when the last presidential elections took place. Theoretically,
Syria should be prepared for that.
But you can't.
Not just an election
No.
haphazardly happens with whoever comes. And now I think I heard that they put some conditions to the candidates. One of them, I heard that you have to be in Syria.
You have to
for
be
the last 10 years.
I believe
Well,
that's
it's-
correct.
What is this?
It's under this
to
yes.
exclude
Yes.
the candidates you don't like.
Yes.
Well, these conditions and even the constitution of Syria should be emerging from a reconciled Syria. When we reconcile Syria and when the oppositions and the government and the regime and everybody comes around the table and agree on the constitution and everybody would be under the constitution, then we can talk about preparing the way for democracy, Syrian democracy.
And presumably, I mean, you would favor some form of proportional representation, as well, what we call proportional representation for Syria. Otherwise, in what the British form of democracy, in the first past of the post system, then minorities, unless you have a single national constituency, which is what was done in post-war Iraq initially, where and their minorities in a one-nation constituency where you don't have regional elections.
Lebanon is struggling with that. Is it all Lebanon, one constituency, or we divided into different constituencies, and who represents what? Lebanon is really struggling with that, and we need to learn from the Lebanese experiment, the Lebanese experience. But Lebanon has a different context. We need to learn from how other people came to put their constitutions. But after all, it has to be Syrian. I'm not an international law expert, but I can see how minorities could be included. Of course, they should be included, and how things can emerge healthily.
It's more than that. This work has to start almost as part of the peace process,
Of course.
because without it, you will not get. I mean, let's face it: the Syrian Christians are among the strongest fighters. I mean, they're fighting in this war, as are every other faction. Well, I say there are some groups that are fighting battles, but not in the same context. For instance, the Kurds are standing aside and trying to secure their own patch.
The Christians are not fighting; they are only those who are in the army.
Yeah, but there are a substantial proportion of professional soldiers in the Syrian army are Christian. I mean,
not substantial. I wouldn't agree
No?
with that. No, not substantial.
well, certainly.
Well, of course, like you know, I always say Christians are like any other minority in Syria. You have those who are in the army, those who are in the Syrian Free Army, or in the opposition, or in wherever, because Syrians are citizens.
But then, given that the minorities, I'm
Yes.
specifically focusing on this because you yourself are a representative of the Christian
Yes.
faith and a Syrian, the minorities have to have some ownership of post-conflict Syria. They have to feel that they will be represented. That means, presumably, that the work on the constitution must start as part of the peace process initially, because unless they see some future in which they play a part, they will want to go on fighting.
How can I feel I own this if I'm not part of the forming of it?
Yes.
Because of that, I said we need to include as many groups as possible, so that everybody feels the ownership, feels that I agreed on this, I was part of it, so that I will defend it.
Yes, of course.
So if you are part of forming something, you can't go against it. Because you are. Why didn't you say no when you were there? But now, the peace process started on, as we said, it was anger, it was pride, it was arrogance. But nobody talked about the real issues, the reconciliation, the justice, the constitution, the bringing task forces. Forming task forces. Every task force looks at an element of the conflict, how to solve it. We went to what I saw in Geneva too was sad, appalling.
And I am perhaps being appalling. I'm defining the Syrian war in sectarian terms. Am I wrong to do that?
It has a sectarian element, definitely. We shouldn't escape that. Of course, sectarianism. When we say sectarianism, it's a very negative word. Once I tweeted a sentence. I said, sectarianism shouldn't be always negative. I mean, acknowledging that there are minorities in Syria, this is not negative. It's a fact. Don't be oversensitive, the Syrians, about that. Let's name the things in their names. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes fighting, that you're trying to marginalize me and I'm trying to fight back, and this is when sectarianism plays a negative role. But when you acknowledge me and I acknowledge you, and you serve and you try your best to give me my right, why would I fight you? Why would I resist you? I would work with you. But when you try to eliminate me, when you try to destroy my existence, of course I will resist you in every way I can. But sectarianism in the conflict, it is horrible.
And to what degree is Syria the plaything of this internecine, inter-Islamic, I suppose, sadly, war, this fault line? You talked about Sykes-Picot, a Shiite-Sunni war, in a sense, that is being played out across the Middle East, not just in Syria, but also in Iraq, and to a lesser degree in other countries, to a lesser degree in although it's not as violent, but in Bahrain or Yemen, Are we seeing something that is unstoppable? I mean, is it one thing to talk about resolving Syria, but can we resolve it without resolving the bigger picture? For example, you are finding young boys from Bahrain or Libya, many Libyans actually, we're talking hundreds, fighting and dying in Syria, let alone Chechens or goodness knows what from Europe, Britons actually even, but that's another issue. But can the Syrian war be addressed without addressing this, I guess you'd call it an inter-Muslim war, this civil war in Islam that is spreading across Iraq and spreading across...
It's not only spreading across the Middle East, it's a worldwide. Because wherever you go, you find Shia community and Sunni community. We are living in a global village. Don't we have Sunni and Shia here?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Right? Well, go to Europe, go to America, go to Australia. I was in Geneva. I saw the Shia community and the Sunni community. So this conflict is worldwide and is dragging the whole world into it. It's very serious. And one thing, I was interviewed once on an Islamic channel, one of the Islamic channels in London. And he said to me, the interviewer, "Father, you have the camera and say a message to the Muslims." I said, when YouTube has this pathetic film on Innocent of Islam, or when this journalist in Denmark published the cartoons,
Yes.
and when this pathetic also pastor in Florida threatened to burn the Quran, we saw millions of Muslims in the streets protesting. Wow. Then we're not looking at a silent majority. Where are the millions in the streets protesting against killing of the Christians? For example, in Syria, Christians are being slaughtered every day.
They're killing each other.
Where are the Muslims, the silent majority?
Yes, but
that went to the streets in millions, and people were killed and people died in the demonstrations of the enthusiasm and the passion for Islam. Well, if you are not in the streets, are you giving me a signal that you agree with that? If you say, no, Father, these are not Muslims, they are doing in the name of Islam. Where are you? Why are you not saying, not in my name? There is a silent Muslim majority needs to move and needs to raise their voice.
Well, presumably not just on the Christian issue, which is a kind of collateral damage to the major fight that's going on between
these. And the Sunni should rise and say, no, we do not kill the Shia.
Yes.
The Shia are our brothers and sisters, and we should live together. We should find a way to coexist. And the Shia should rise and say the same about the Sunni. But what is happening? The tension is growing in some countries in the Middle East. Shrines are being destroyed. Graves are being dug out. This is ridiculous. This is awful.
So, Father Nadim, in conclusion, thinking about Syria, but thinking about the Middle East as a whole, and indeed the world as a whole, I mean, there are great Christian, I don't know whether you call them philosophers, but great Christian thinkers like Khalil Gibran in Lebanon, who have advocated a world without frontiers, a world in which there is harmony. And are men like this dreamers, or is there a real future there someday where we can all truly live together in peace in today's world?
If we live without hope, life is not worth living. We live with hope. And I have two messages to say. One message to the West and one message to the East, if you allow me.
Of course.
My message to the West, I would say, stop playing double standard. You are labeling people as terrorists wherever you like, and the same people become friends and allies wherever you like. You decide where to label them. I think this double standard is evil and bringing a lot of bloodshed. The West has to stop it and bring the values that the West we respect and we live in the West, the values that we love and we appreciate, and we see how these values helped for centuries to emerge and build the West that we know today. My message is to the East, I would say, after all, we are in one geographic location together. We are in together, whether in suffering, in joy, whether a better life or worse. It's like marriage. When you give your vows for the bad time and the good times. So we are married to each other in the East. Christians, Muslims, Alawites, Druze, Turkmen, Ismaili, you name it. We are in the vows of marriage in this piece of the world. We have to stick to our vows to build a life in the bad times and in the good times. And I hope that we can bring reconciliation and justice in order to reach to the peace.
Father Nadim Nassar, thank you very much for those powerful words.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Nadim, for being on the English Hour here on ANN. Thank you.